Welcome to the 1000 Hours Outside podcast. We have Lauren Betzing today joining us, and I'm super excited to talk about everything that she has to share about mindfulness with kids and in nature. She has these fantastic cards that I had a chance to look through today. I couldn't stop looking through them. They're so fantastic. So I'm excited to share those with everyone, and welcome to the podcast, Lauren.
Thanks, Jenny. I'm so glad to be here and just so excited to get to share some of the stuff with your audience today. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, they're going to love it. So let me read a little bit about Lauren. Lauren is the founder and chief editor at Heartflow Kids, a nature-based mindfulness company that is on a mission to connect children to their inner potential through nature, mindfulness, and imaginative play. That's beautiful. Pulling from her years of experience in academia, children's health programming, and policy positions at a national level, as well as her experience as a yoga and meditation teacher, she is passionately focused on helping to connect children and families to the magic of nature and the present moment. Lauren holds a BA in psychological brain sciences from Dartmouth College and a master's degree in chronic disease epidemiology and health policy from Yale University. She is a registered RYT2. You have got a lot of accomplishments here. This is amazing. I'm feeling bad about myself a little bit. Okay, she is a registered RYT 200 yoga and meditation instructor and holds a health and wellness coaching certification from Well Coaches. In the contemplative practices, she is formally trained in mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, yoga nidra, and kundalini yoga and meditation. Lauren, good for you. You have accomplished so much.
Well, thank you.
Good for you. I think that's fantastic. You are just going after life.
Yeah.
And it sounds like these are things obviously that you're very passionate about, and that's why you continue to grow and learn about them. It's interesting. And one of the things that we had talked about talking about is just about being present. And so before we get there, though, can you tell us a little bit about you and about your family?
Sure. So we actually, one of the first things that really drew us out into nature for a really committed, getting out there every day was actually the 1000 Hours Outside Challenge. I think it was probably over 3 years ago now, but like most families, we were kind of outside and adventuring. Like my husband and I are both athletics. We're always outdoors doing things, but it wasn't the priority that it was, I think, before we started the challenge. And we kind of found ourselves in that, going to the activities and going to school and all that kind of stuff. And once we really made it a priority for our family, that's really when we started to actually around that time have a lot of shifts like in our lifestyle. Since that time, we've kind of transitioned to being more of an unschooling, homeschooling family. Our kiddos are in, my older son's in agile learning community, but we just spend a ton of time outdoors. We think of nature as the absolute best teacher. And my husband and I just both love kind of engaging with the boys outside. And we've just had so many wonderful experiences and memories since we've made it a huge part of our lives. And it's also played a huge part in my transition and kind of my career and like professional trajectory to even starting the company that I recently started that really focuses on nature-based mindfulness tools and practices for kids. So it's been an awesome journey. And I just think even over the last couple of years, the last 2 years, really, as things have really shifted in our external environment, we're just seeing more and more the value of embedding these practices and helping our kids get outside and learn really deeply the magic that nature has to offer.
Yeah. What a beautiful journey. And it's newer. It's newer because your youngest is just 3 years old, right? You said you have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
My youngest is 3 and my older son is 6.
Yeah. And you guys are in North Carolina?
Yeah, so we were in the Raleigh area for quite some time. And then about a year ago, we actually moved out to the mountains, which was a big transition for us too, because it was, moving from, kind of suburban city life out to the mountains where it's a good distance to get to anything. We live right off actually the Blue Ridge Parkway. So there's a ton of wonderful hikes and the rivers, and we're right now actually in the middle of peak leaf season. And
Wow.
so there's people coming in from all over to kind of see the beauty of this area. So we feel very fortunate that we made the leap and we get to just literally enjoy one of the most beautiful
Wow.
places every day.
Wow. So is that near Asheville? The
Yeah, it's
Blue Ridge?
just about an hour or so north of Asheville. Yep.
Okay. This is like our favorite place to come vacation. I don't even know if you know that. This is, have you
Oh,
been to,
no, I didn't.
I'm pretty sure that this is where we've been. Like you go along the Blue Ridge Parkway and there's like that cradle of forestry and the graveyard fields and Skinny Dip Falls. And you have all these like little spots where you stop and you can look out, but you can take these hikes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
that's
So we're
it.
more of like the northern portion of that, but it's the
Okay.
same thing. There's all these like pull-offs and hikes and all that kind of stuff.
Wow.
So
And
it's a neat
waterfalls. What a
area.
cool place to live. That's
Yeah.
fantastic. Um, well, let's talk about being present. Because that's something that popped out at me from this some of your topics. And you know, my situation is that um going out in nature was really the first time I felt present with my kids. When I'm home, I have a really hard time being present because there's so many things to do,
Hmm.
laundry and dishes and dusting and cleaning and oh, there's so many things. But when we go outside, and especially if phones are put away, even if I have a book, I feel like I can be present. But phone, I think, takes our attention in a different way. Um, but I just found that I was more present and aware and in the moment with my kids. So um, let's talk about just the power of the present moment and how nature helps with that.
Yeah, so absolutely. So we can talk a little bit about the nature piece and then perhaps how to bring it, inside as well. So I always talk about nature as being the absolute best meditation and mindfulness teacher because as you said, you're almost forced into the present moment by going outside, right?
Hmm.
And there's just so many different things that nature offers. As we talk about, mindfulness and this being in this present moment and this focus on what it's happening now, nature provides this just amazing landscape to just look at the beauty that exists within the world, but then also have this really deep, like sensory experience at the same time. So, the reason that we become so present is that there's just so much going on around us, right? We can see with our eyes the beauty, we can hear the birds chirping, we can feel the wind. We kind of get immersed in this like bodily, sensory experience. And so, we find ourselves in the moment because of that. And so there's so much, amazing research that shows all the benefits of nature for adults and things like that. But they're also starting to show in kids as they're getting outside, we're actually starting to see some of the results of this and what happens in the brain. Like it really creates this like really calm brain state for
Hmm.
kids and they just become super relaxed. And then obviously, as many people know, all the benefits that result from that, are huge. Just decreased anxiety, more resilience, less stress, all the things that we need more of right now. And
Yeah.
so there's kind of this like outdoor environment that just occurs when we're outside and we really get present. But when we talk just more macro level, just about the present moment, what kind of happens and tends to happen in our lives is, we get stuck in this busy, hectic, like frenetic pace, right? We have one thing to go to the next, here's our to-dos, and all of a sudden we find ourselves lost in our minds. We spend so much of our days lost in our thoughts and lost in our minds. And by returning to the present moment and bringing it in as a practice within our lives, it allows us to come back to what is actually happening right here and now, right?
Mm.
So we can think of the past as all the things that occurred previously. And we can think of the future of all the now moments that haven't exactly occurred yet. And so when you really truly start to grasp that, you see that all that exists is right now. And when you find yourself here and right now, you start to practice it more and you start to feel like there's just so much peace and presence in the moment
Yeah.
that you kind of let go, right? You let go of the thoughts, you let go of the future, and you keep returning because it just feels so good within inside your body. And all action, everything comes from right now. We think we trick ourselves, our minds trick us to think like, well, if I think about this is going to happen in the future, that, it's actually some like security or safety mechanism of the brain. But really all you can do is take action in this moment because that
Mm.
is literally all there is.
Right. That's so beautiful. And I think, like you said, it's so pertinent for right now because there's a lot that we could worry about. And there are a lot of things that are unknown. And what does the future look like? Um, so I think all that, I love all that. I just had on, I'm not sure if you've ever read any of his books. I think if you haven't, you find them fascinating, but Dr. Jacob Lieberman,
Hmm.
and he has a book called Light, Future of Medicine, and another one called Luminous Life, and all about how light guides us. And so when I was reading about you, I thought of something he had said in our podcast. He was talking about how light guides the animals, so their fur knows when to thicken. And he said they don't say, oh no, I forgot to get my coat at Costco. They're right there in the moment. And he said our physiology is always reading what has not yet occurred, so that when it occurs, we're right there. We're not behind the 8 ball, we're not ahead. We are meeting each moment. And this is called presence. It's not something you do. He said it occurs when we're naturally dancing with life in a
Yeah,
harmonious manner. And I thought that was so
absolutely.
beautiful,
Yes, that's
that
perfect.
nature, being in tune with nature, guides us to be present, even just through
Yeah.
light exposure. So, and like you said, never more important time than now. You brought up neuroscience,
Mhm.
um, and the impact of nature on children's developing brains. And one of the things you talk about is the myth of the resilient child. So
Yes.
I think that's something important to talk about. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So, I think there's this, a lot of people are hear the saying, well, children are so resilient. We probably hear that all the time. And how that got started and kind of took off is remains, I guess, to be seen. But one of the things that we really know from all the latest research neuroscience and children's development is that the first 7 years of life, up until kind of age of 8, where the analytical brain starts to come on board, the children are really in an alpha and theta brain state that is completely open to suggestion, and they literally lay the groundwork for all their thoughts, beliefs, and experiences. And so on the negative side of that, obviously, as any trauma arises or any negative experiences arise, they actually become embodied within the self, and they carry them and they show up kind of in our future experiences, for the most part, subconsciously. And so there's kind of this idea that, anything can kind of happen to kids, they can bounce back, etc. It's just more so of the fact that a lot of times kids don't have the skills or language to emotionally express what's going on. So they shut down. And a lot of times they actually store that within their body. There's some really interesting literature and books. There's one called The Body Keeps Score that goes really deep into this, if
Mm,
anyone is interested. And so there's also that side of it where we can obviously have, negative experiences that stick with us, but there's also the positive side of it as well, which I like to focus on more so. And that's that in this period from 0 to 7, literally kids are walking around this almost like hypnotic state, a very like deep meditative state. And that's also, like I said, where they're laying the groundwork of all their kind of beliefs and just building kind of the programming that they'll carry in their life. And so we have this just amazing window of opportunity when kids are particularly in that age range. That doesn't mean that after, they still can't have great impact. But if we can introduce them in that time to really some core social emotional skills and resilient techniques using mindfulness and some other resources as well, we really give kids this amazing groundwork, this amazing foundation that they'll be able to carry for the rest of their lives. And so that's kind of the idea of, really understanding that there's just this core window, and we have this amazing opportunity to lay down these beliefs in kids, and really positive, like growth oriented. I am able to manage my body and listen to my emotions, and I have this inner knowing, right, that can carry me
mm,
throughout life.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Have you ever read, there's a book called The Disappearance of Childhood. It's by Neil
I haven't read that.
Postman. And he talks about, it's really interesting. He talks about, and my time frames are going to be a little wrong, but he talks about, let's say, up until the 1970s, that as a society, we were really concerned about protecting children's emotional states. He talked about how, if a kid would walk into a room and there was a radio program on about, the news or something scary, the adults would turn it off. There was sort of this collective thought that, we protect the minds and emotions of children, but there
Mhm.
wasn't as much thought given toward protecting them physically, right? So kids would run around and play and, scrape their knees and fall off their bikes and do these sort of things. And so he talks about how, I think it's around the 70s where there was like this flip,
Hmm.
right? Where all of a sudden we're super concerned about children's physical safety, but so much less concerned about sort of their emotional and, their well-being. And even just as an example, I got an email from a company recently. They're like, can we partner up? They sell pants for like babies and toddlers that have like butt pads and knee pads built in. So it's like that kind of is an example of
Yeah,
how we have switched. And I think he talks maybe a little bit about working, and we want kids to be resilient because we want to feel better about the decisions that we're making.
exactly.
um,
Mhm.
but I like what you said about the fact that it is a bit of a myth, um, and maybe we should flip back a little bit more toward the way that it used to be.
Yeah. And
um,
I mean, it's absolutely, we're going to make obviously mistakes as parents. you know, there's the whole, point to some extent, of this existence is for us to learn and grow and have these challenges, right? It's just the human experience. So it's
mhm.
not like it's not a message of, we have to protect them from all these things, right? It's more of that, you know, these early life experiences matter, right? That's where the
Yeah,
foundation of kind of trauma is laid. And quite frankly, for adults that end up in therapy, what do they spend most of the time talking about? The early childhood experiences, right? And how
right,
they're now showing
right.
up in their later life. So it's just more of a note to everything that's kind of going on in the world right now. It's important to just remember that there is this window and we do have this opportunity to just lay this groundwork for kids
Yeah,
and really focus on kind of building a foundation.
yeah. And what we talk about at 1000 Hours Outside is really, this is simpler than we may think. On the flip side, like you said, the positive side, it's just getting out to play, giving kids time, giving them time to explore, and open-ended play experiences and little playmates, that those set up this foundation for lifelong learning. And it helps
Absolutely.
them in every facet of their development. So it doesn't have to be strenuous, and it doesn't have to be expensive, and it doesn't have to be high stress. It can actually be real simple. Um, it's a simple concept, maybe not quite so easy to implement, but the concept is simple at least.
Yeah, and
That's
that's
Oh, go
oh,
ahead.
I was going to say, and that's one of the things too. I think the research, really shows as well. They've done some of these studies, neuroscience studies and just impact studies with kids. And people think it has to be these grand adventures where they're going
Mm,
out for an hour and a half to 2 hours to these things. And it's really just truly green space and daily exposure. I mean, just
yeah,
repeatedly. That's where you're really seeing like the strong impact. It doesn't have to be complicated. It can be
right.
very, very simple.
Yes, nature is everywhere, that's for sure. Um, okay, I love stories. So you have in here the story of how and why Einstein had many of his breakthroughs while in nature.
Yes, so I love sharing this story because I think it helps people to just understand more about how releasing from the mind actually leads to some just great breakthroughs and then also just more presence in daily life. So I love sharing this story because I just think it helps kind of provide context for people, and I think it also helps parents because there's such a big focus on academic and cognitive performance, and there's so much more to the picture, right?
Hmm.
For kids as they're growing
Yes,
up. So
absolutely.
yeah, so the story kind of goes, and if anyone actually who's interested in going deeper on this one or learning more about it, I first learned about this particular story. There's a wonderful book by Gary Ferguson called The Eight Master Lessons of Nature. So if you want to go a little deeper on this, you could dig into that. But the story essentially goes that when Einstein would get stuck on a problem, he would head outside. There was kind of a patch of
Mm,
woods on the Princeton campus called the Institute Woods. And some people might think, he's heading outside just to clear his brain, whatever it is. But he had a really particular technique that he would use. He would stand outside, he'd look up at the trees, he'd look down at the soil, he'd look around at everything, and he tried to figure out the workings of everything. And he did this on purpose because there's absolutely no way, right, that we could ever truly wrap our minds around what is occurring. Like, we still don't even know what is occurring in a square like yard of dirt. Like, we still
Yeah.
don't really fully grasp what's even happening in the soil. And so he would take himself to this limit where he was just trying to understand everything until eventually his intellect, just let go. He fell to his knees, right? And he opens up to this more freer and intuitive space where then kind of information would flow in. And so it's said that he had his absolute best breakthroughs while he was in nature. He actually did a lot of sailing at sea,
Wow.
and things like that. And a lot of actually just most well-known scientists and just, folks that really kind of just like push the limit on some of these concepts. A lot of them are known for having a very, very deep connection with nature. And he even says, one of his famous quotes is, look deep into nature and you will understand everything.
Wow.
And, I just feel like that quote, right, obviously says so much. And so it's just kind of a neat story. People assume that, Einstein's brain was, radically different from everyone else's, but really he had just over time kind of with this actually had a really great support network growing up. His parents really let him focus on, curiosity and creativity and all these interests, but he had really just developed this technique where he could let go of his mind. And he said every single time
Hmm.
when, like he was literally trying to figure out the nature of this reality, right? Not simple stuff, but it was every time when he would let go of his mind where he would have his breakthrough on these concepts.
Oh,
And so,
that's
yeah.
fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know any of that. I'd heard the quote before, so that makes a little bit more sense. And it's ironic that all the baby Einstein stuff was like exactly the opposite of what
Yeah.
he did, right?
Yeah.
Like he wasn't looking
Absolutely.
at flashcards, he was just outside looking at the dirt. So,
Exactly.
yeah, that's interesting and just kind of a fun little twist, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so for parents that want their kids to do well academically and cognitively, that's a good reminder, like Einstein, everybody knows about Einstein. He spent a lot of time outside. So,
Yep.
let's talk about social and emotional learning and how parents can help their kids incorporate social and emotional learning when they're outside exploring with their kids.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's so many different ways you can do this. One of my favorite things to do is to help children just really connect to the outside, right? Connect to the outdoors so they feel like we all are a part of nature, but really start to kind of build that foundation within themselves. And so, as you said, when we're outside, it can be as simple as kids are just playing and walking around, but let's say you're going on a walk and you just have those like really simple moments where you can just stop and say, oh, wow, have you ever looked at the trees, how they're so deeply rooted into the ground? Their
Mm,
roots carry on, for a while underneath us. But look how their branches sway in the wind and they're so flexible. Trees are really deeply rooted, but also flexible at the same time. Have you ever thought about that? And that might be a little bit, of a long-winded way to explain it, but just dropping in these like simple nuggets about all the lessons that nature has to offer us, or
yeah.
even seasonally, right? Right now, the leaves are changing. I mean, what a wonderful metaphor for teaching kids about what it is to just let go, to be able to embrace change, how different
Mm,
seasons lead to different times within our lives, how to be able to shift and change, right? As the seasons change, as the leaves fall. So there's just all these just amazing lessons that are out in nature that parents can just simply share with their kids, just in those simple moments. So I think that's just a great way to honestly teach some of the best lessons that there are in life, right? About
yes.
adapting to change, about
Yes.
letting go, all these
Resilience.
things. Absolutely. Resilience,
Yeah. Seasons.
the lesson of the caterpillar, right? Sitting in the cocoon so tightly for weeks, and then it lets go, its wings come out, right? And it's this thing of beauty. It just sometimes, we have to be in these like kind of moments of contraction before we have expansion. And
Mm,
so as parents can get out in nature and just start, it's almost the process, I say, is that parents really need to reawaken nature within themselves first, right? It's
yeah.
one thing to kind of go outside and have the experience, but are you really feeling it? Are you really feeling it within your body? And just start to look around and develop that awe and wonder that exists, and bring it inside so you're holding it. And then once you're holding it, it becomes so much easier to then model and share, some of those lessons with your kids.
Yeah.
Some other kind of like simple practices you can do as well is I talked before a little bit about how it provides such a wonderful sensory environment. And so one of the things you can do, it's a great practice for kids, is to kind of put them into the mindset of a nature element, right? So you could choose a tree with like an awesome kind of thick trunk, or you could sit down by the river. And let's just use the tree as an example. You have them sit down, like, let's just sit and put our backs against this tree. Oh, wow, this feels so sturdy. Can you feel that sturdiness within your body? Have you ever needed to stand strong in a situation just like this tree? And you start just doing these kind of like simple
Mm.
examples with kids, and it's so, so very tangible for them that
Yeah.
they really, truly grasp it and they start to embody it, which is kind of one of the main things that, I really speak to. And then just as a last kind of like third thing to share is nature is also just kind of from a social and emotional perspective, a great landscape for helping children with empathy. So we know that everything in nature is completely connected, and everything relies on each other, right? If you just think about the bees, right, pollinating all of our crops, there's just so many different interconnecting facets to nature. And so you can have children kind of think about, well, what is my role, kind of in this outside nature world, outside my door, in my community. And perhaps it's just doing a small thing like finding the right food for, the bird species in the area, or perhaps it's planting a garden and, using some of the vegetables, to share with neighbors or whatever it is, just kind of finding the simple ways that children can connect with nature to see that they're part of this connected ecosystem and that quite frankly everything is connected.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because we are new to gardening and I have missed out. My not at any fault of my parents because my mom is always into gardening and my dad. So this was like my fault. I missed out. But we planted a bunch of flowers this year and this is our third year doing it, but this year we went a little more all out. And so sometimes we'd go back there and it's like there's all these bees buzzing around and moths and butterflies and praying mantis and you're like we've connected, like they're buzzing around in a little flower that we planted, and then you start to think
Mhm.
like, well, where would they be if we wouldn't have planted those and they'd be somewhere else, or we planted sunflowers. And so for the end of the sunflower season, these yellow finches would come. And every time we'd go walk out to the garden, then they'd fly away, but they're up in there eating all the seeds. So it is a
Yeah.
fun way that you do feel very connected. Like what I do matters, and we're
Right.
all kind of in this together. And it's so simple. A packet of seeds is not expensive. And so it's something I thought about a lot this year because I kept going back there and thinking, I wonder where this bee would be if I wouldn't have planted this flower or whatever. Like it's kind of silly, but it's a
Yeah, and
thing.
bees are actually, I didn't give that example, but bees are one of the best examples because they're just so integral, right, to our ecosystem. And they each have like a very specific role within the colony. So it's actually it's a great life lesson as well for just being in community. And one of the examples of ways, for kids to get out and contribute to nature is just opening up, a pollination area, either for butterflies or bees, and they can
Yeah.
just watch this life that just emerges and they
Yeah.
played a role in it. And so they just start to see the impact they can have. And it's just so important, for the planet in general. So
Well, one of the things that I really get out of nature, in terms of lessons for parent, is about growth. And I think, when we grow a plant from seed, at the beginning you have to be very careful, right? You've got the seedling, and you really have to water it several times a day, and sometimes you have to, you have to turn it so that it's facing the light the right way. But at a certain point, you put it in the ground and it does its thing, and then you kind of step back and you get to admire its beauty. And it's like with our kids, if we think about their growth, it's not linear, it's not
mhm.
assembly line, and I think at the beginning we really have to take a lot of care, and then we plant and we water and we help and we do the things that we need to, but you know they all grow and produce their own beauty and serve their own purpose. And so I think there's always like this, yeah, how do you know kids are growing? And we test and we test and we assess, we do these different things, but like in nature, we know it's growing because we see it
Yeah.
and we enjoy it. And so that's something that in terms of nature lessons for parents, that's something I think about quite a bit, that there's so much variation, that the root systems are all different, and that we can kind of grow in our own ways. So
Yeah,
I
just
love,
trust the process, right?
yeah, I love that the concept of just learning so many things from nature. How can parents who are feeling stressed or overwhelmed during these times use nature as a tool for less stress and anxiety and more peace and more presence?
Yeah, so we covered this a little bit, as I was kind of talking about some different ways to kind of get into nature. But one of the things that parents can do is just really take the time themselves to kind of reconnect to nature, right? So we talk so much about, you know, giving so much to their kids and giving all these resources and things like that, but we all have to fill our cup as well. And so one of the things that I think is great is, even as you're doing the challenge or trying to get all these hours outside, make sure some of the hours are just for you. Just get out there and walk through the woods by yourself, through the trees, and just take that time to just kind of decompress, right? So just having your own alone adult time in nature, just to kind of bring that magic within you. Because we know that children learn the best through modeling, right? So if they know you're truly valuing that time out in nature and you find it as this just really restorative and like peaceful experience, they're going to take that into. So that's what I'd say is kind of like number one, is just get out there yourself. And and
Mhm.
it could just literally be during nap time. Take your shoes off, socks off your feet, and just like ground into the earth and take a couple deep breaths. Like, it doesn't have to be a half-hour hike or whatever it is. It could literally
Right.
something like that to just connect, or sit and stare up at the trees or whatever it is. The other thing I would say too is that a lot of times, we're with our kids a lot and they're outside, experiencing nature and having fun and playing around. And obviously, some level of our awareness has to be on them, for basic like safety things. But as you can, see if you can actually really come into the present moment yourself and actually turn your child's play into a mindfulness practice in of itself. Start to notice, like when they're playing, are you off on your to-do list?
Hmm.
Are you, clicking through what needs to be done tomorrow, what happened the other day, whatever it is? How much of the time you actually spending lost in your mind? Perhaps there's things you actually have to do or get done when you're out in nature, right? Watching the kids play, like writing up the grocery list or whatever it is. But if those things aren't happening and you're just kind of sitting there, be in the moment, watch them. Use it as like a great tool for yourself to have a practice. I think people sometimes feel kind of limited, when they want to start a meditation practice, or just feel like, I don't have the time. It feels really overwhelming. And what I always tell people is the absolute best time to practice is when you're in the middle of life, right? That's when it truly, truly matters. So use time when you're outside with your kids. If you don't have anything else going on, you don't have super young ones that, you have to kind of constantly be there, be in the moment. And then you can also too, if you do have younger ones and, maybe it's not as easy for you to kind of just like zen out and enjoy the nature, really watch them closely and see how they're like. The other day, as an example, we have these little woolly worms, which are these little fuzzy caterpillars, and they're really cute. And my son saw one. He sprinted off his bike, laid down on the ground, perched his arms like this, and just stared at it. And I just sat there and was
Aw.
like, how cool that kids live so in the moment that they'll run off their bike, literally plant themselves in the middle of the street. We luckily don't live on a busy street. And just stare at these like little tiny fuzzy creatures.
Hmm.
And so just watching your kids and how they naturally act right before, you could say, that's kind of taken out of us a little bit by how
Yeah.
busy and hectic society is, that can remind you that there's no reason, you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, whatever it is, you can have that awe and wonder yourself. Like, how can you bring that back into your life? And by watching that with your kids, in the present moment, being really focused, it kind of helps you to do that. And so those are just kind of two, simple ways, both on your own and then when you're with kids, that you can kind of use nature to really focus more on finding yourself in the moment.
Hmm. Those are really good ideas. I've been thinking, Lauren, about how life used to be, and this is something that gets talked about somewhat often, is that, well, I grew up in the 80s, and so kids just kind of were running around in the neighborhood and parents were inside. I
Yeah.
think in general, it was mothers that were inside and fathers were at work and moms were getting things done or making dinner or who knows what they were doing, right? And I have had these thoughts of, this isn't happening anymore. There's not this neighborhood play. And I've had these thoughts of, well, how nice would it be, to be able to kick the kids out and, you get 4 hours to get stuff done, or I don't
Hmm.
know, iron your sheets. I don't, whatever people were doing, who knows? But, I think in this day and age, I am, in retrospect, I'm actually glad that I have to be involved because I need it. And this sort of shift has happened where we're taking our kids. Like, this is different than how it used to be, right? Because there's not neighborhood kids out playing. And so what happens is we're involved. And
Hmm.
I actually think that's a great thing. I used to kind of be jealous of the old ways, but I'm like, well, you know what? This has turned out to be good for me. And I think since the world is just so complex, it's almost like this is the thing that will help offset it, for parents. And so, nature has really helped me on a personal level. I was in a bad spot before we started getting outside. So definitely helps with stress and anxiety, and we need it right now, right?
Absolutely. Hmm.
Uh, well, let's talk a little bit about the mindfulness in your cards, which I don't have physical copies of, but I printed out some. I'm gonna hold up a couple of these here. Um, you have these cards called Infinite Kids in Nature. Is that the name of them?
That's right. Yeah.
That's the name of them. And so here's the thing. So I don't have the actual ones, and so I've
Yeah,
got the
I
PD.
can
I've
hold
got
one
the.
up
You
here
can hold
just
up
to
yours.
kind of give you an
Yeah, they're really
example
cute.
of around it.
So,
But yeah.
so I want to tell you my experience. So I was like, getting ready to talk, and I pulled up the PDF on the computer. There's like a big thing about ink, and I was like, how much paper do we have? I was like, I'm just going to print off one of these cards, Lauren, so I can hold it up. I mean, I guess I should have thought that you were going to have one, of course, but I was like, I'll print out one. So I opened the first one, and then I was like, oh, this is really interesting. So I was like, I'll just print out two, because this next one's really interesting too. So then I like scrolled to the third one, and then I was like, oh wait, no, I got to print out this one too. And then I just kept going, and finally,
I
I had
know.
to even look at what the next one is because I'm going to be printing out all these sheets of paper.
Oh
They're
my goodness.
really, really phenomenal, Lauren. So I'm going to show these. So this one, no, obviously it's not normally this size. It's on a beautiful little card. Show yours one more time.
Oh,
So
so
it's
yeah.
like
So the cards are actually kind of like pretty thick,
it's a
but
card,
they're yeah,
but it's a card. It's not on a piece of
like
paper.
an activity card. You
So
can think
this
of it
one
as.
talks
Yeah.
about the golden sunflower. So this would
Hmm.
be on the front of it. And it's just so beautifully worded. And there's things on here I had no idea. It says, the center of each flower is a secret code that nature carries, a perfect sequence that creates a spiral to allow in the most light.
Yeah.
That is fascinating. So this is why I had to keep printing out the cards, because I was like, well, wait a minute, I'm fascinated by this one. So then, and then on the back, then you'd have the lessons of the sunflower. So you talk about the Fibonacci sequence, you talk about the patterns. And so the Fibonacci sequence is a great math thing. Uh, so something super interesting for kids to learn about. Talk about the spirals. You talk about the golden ratio, um, and so let me read the sentence. Not only can sunflowers follow the sun from east to west, but also they are a perfect example of the hidden sacred geometric codes that we all carry. Lauren, this is like phenomenal writing and super interesting. And then you have this explore and expand. So on the front, you've got the sunflower, and then on the back, the lessons of the sunflower, and then this explore and expand. And this is where you get in sort of to the mindfulness, right? Um, Take a few moments to stand here and feel their golden color and their warm light. Look closely, feel the glow. I mean, this is just absolutely beautiful. So, you know, I mean, they're so good. There's the sprouting seed,
Thank you.
and then it was the speck of sand, and it was talking about, how, it was like how long it took thousands of years for this one speck of sand to form. Anyway, I was really, really drawn in. So talk to me about the cards. Tell me,
Sure.
tell me how you came up with them. tell us how we use them. I know they're in over 40 schools already. I want to hear all about them.
Sure, absolutely. Yes. So the idea from the cards really came from my own life experience and my experience with my kids. I had known I've been a meditation teacher for over 6 years, mostly teaching adults, but doing some things with kids. And as my older son, kind of started to get around the age where I knew, I could start really talking to him about some of these practices. I had looked at some of the different resources online and even bought him some of the, I'd say more like kid oriented things. And he just had zero interest. And I was just like, all right,
Hmm.
let's go back to the drawing board on this one. And so I just started to notice as we were out in nature that, as we all do with our kids, they were so much more engaged and just interested. And I started to notice within myself as I was seeing all these different nature elements, I started to see all these kind of lessons and like mindfulness practices within it. And so I just started to kind of naturally mention to my son when he was kind of down at the river throwing rocks. And, we have this kind of neat large river kind of in our area. And there's all these like boulders and rocks and like the water's like literally going in 10 different directions, but it just always keeps flowing. And I just said to him, there's one card that's about the river that's kind of based on this experience. But I just said, have you ever noticed how the water keeps flowing, irregardless of the, rocks or resistance on its path? It always heads downstream. It always finds a way, no matter what is in, what is in its path. And it shapes and curves the land, sometimes forming waterfalls, right? Sometimes these cool little prairies and things like that. And so I talked to him just about that and I started to notice, and he really started to pay attention. He's like, oh, wow, that really does happen. Like, see how it moves around that rock and that rock. And then, I might just mention something else. It's like, oh, wow, sometimes I love to close my eyes and just feel the flow of the water in my body. Have you ever done that? It feels so peaceful. And he'd be like, oh, no, I haven't. And he'd sit there and do it. And then we'd be out there and then I'd just catch him like literally sitting on this rock with his eyes closed, just feeling the water in his body. And I was like, wow, like, I'm onto something here. Like he is
Mhm.
really embodying these concepts and he is, carrying them with him, right? And he's making these
Yes.
kind of connections to them. So I started to kind of see that happening. And then honestly, the cards just, I almost say like they wrote themselves.
Wow.
Obviously, I sat down and wrote them on the computer, but just every nature element that came up, all the lessons, everything it just came together just so naturally and organically. And the process behind the cards and the way they're set out the way they are is extremely kind of thoughtful. So the way that I did it is on the front of the card there's just a really deep, beautiful illustration that just
Mhm.
engages kids. And there's just kind of this like brief kind of 1 to 2 sentence description about what this kind of nature element offers us. So even if you just looked at the front, you could walk away with this great visual experience and then also this just like neat lesson about, what the river offers
Can I
us.
read one? Can I read one?
Sure.
Okay, so this is the next one in my pile because I printed out so many. And because I agree with you. I think even from the first set of sentences on the front, this is a sprouting seed, and it says, before a seed begins to grow, it is like it's asleep. The seed is dormant and hardy and can withstand changing conditions. It is not until it begins to sprout that it is vulnerable and needs just the right amount of light, water, and food to grow. And there's just a beautiful image of the sprouts there. So, I mean, I agree. Just from the front of the card, you get so much.
Yeah, and then what I really tried to do on the back is really help kids get into this process of embodiment. And this is something that's really just kind of emerging in the kind of neuroscience literature and just even in kind of the mindfulness space as well. Is the whole point is helping kids to just truly embody a concepts, right? So it becomes the full body felt experience, of the thing, the state, or the experience of whatever is occurring. It's not just the thought or the mental understanding of it, but it's something that you actually feel in the sensations of the body. So the cards are very purposely set up for the top portion to really kind of get into this like deep cognitive, not deep, but just this cognitive understanding of the concept. So kind of you were talking about the sunflower, as everyone sees sunflowers, but to really understand that the seeds are laid out in the Fibonacci sequence and to allow in the most light, they're in the golden ratio. I mean, it's so
Wow. I mean, I didn't know
fascinating,
any of
right?
that.
So it just kind of like opens up the awareness and you're like, wow, like sunflowers have this much intelligence within them. Nature has this much intelligence. And then after you kind of have this like open awareness, like the brain's kind of perked up, the mind's kind of like, wow, that's really, really interesting. And I see it happens with adults all the time as well. Then you kind of let that go, and then you kind of come into the body, and that's when you go into the mindfulness exercise that's related to the element. So in the case, there's one on stardust. So in the case of like stardust, you talk about, what is it to think that we were literally formed from an explosion of a star, right? And all these different elements that were formed from it, and you feel like that within your body. And so you're really having this like deep sensory experience that kind of brings in the information that you just learned, but also, kind of bringing in these core mindfulness concepts of the breath, deep visualization, imagination, and then just really kind of grounding into the body. So the goal is for it to be a total mind and body experience so that children really hold and embody the concepts.
Yeah, they're really, really, really beautiful. I love them. And you said you have different schools that are using them?
Yes, so we've had a lot of forest schools and nature schools that have been interested in the cards. I think we've sent them out. I mean, the cards actually just in the whole company just recently launched in the last 2 months, but we've had a lot of interest from schools and nature schools. And so a whole bunch of sets of cards have gone out, and we've started to get pictures back, but they're finding them really engaging because
Yeah.
they're able to introduce them in morning circle time, or just even
Yeah.
have kids kind of explore them, or they're doing even just as a nature study where they're kind of taking one of the elements and then going deeper on it, but using the card as kind of like the basis for that.
Yeah.
And then a lot of people don't have, really a lot of mindfulness resources that they can incorporate into the classroom that are simple. And I think that's what a lot of the feedback we've gotten from teachers is that they're just simple and they're
Yeah.
easy and they're helpful for us too.
Yeah. And they're
We're getting from adults.
fascinating. They're
Yeah,
fascinating. Well done. I love them. Okay, so let's do a mindfulness exercise right here during the
sure.
podcast.
Okay, awesome. Yes, I'd love to. So the practice that I love to do with everyone is just one of the most simple things that I think we can do. And so this is great when you're outside in nature. This is great when you're in the house and you just need a moment to stop. So what I just like everybody to do, if you're driving or any of those things, obviously save this and do it later. But just take a moment here to take your feet and ground them onto the floor. And then just relax your body. If your spine is straight, and just start to relax. And then you can gently close your eyes if you like, and take a deep breath in through your nose and out through your nose. And then just bring your attention down to your toes and just notice with awareness the area around your toes, and then your feet, and then your ankles, and then your shins, and then your knees. Releasing any tension, but just bringing awareness to the body, to your thighs, to your hips, to your abdomen, to your chest, to your shoulders, to your upper arms, to your forearms, to your hands, and then back up to your neck, to your face, to your ears, to your eyes, and to the top of your head. And just feel the energy that exists within your body. Feel the energy and space around your body. Take a deep breath in through your nose and out through your nose. And then just bring your attention to your heart. And find yourself here in this moment. Just deeply relaxed and deeply present. And remember the state that you find yourself in now is available in every moment. Taking a deep breath in through the nose and out through the nose. And then when you're ready, just slowly opening your eyes.
You're good at that.
And so, yeah, so that was just about a minute. And I just call that the really
Wow.
simple inner body awareness practice. And I recommend it as just the best place for people to start, because as you can bring awareness to your body and just release some of the tension that you're holding within it, just by doing that really brief body scan, just kind of taking your attention up from the top and then reconnecting to your heart and just finding yourself in the present moment. If you ask yourself, is everything okay right now? Everything is usually okay right now. And so it's just this great kind of reminder to just constantly return, let go of the past, let go of the future, and find yourself now, right here, right now.
Yeah.
And I recommend a lot of times to parents is just practice that throughout the day when you can remember. It can be in the middle of the workday. It could be even when you're waiting in line at the grocery store. You don't even have to close your eyes. Sometimes it's actually helpful to practice it with your eyes opened, because that allows you to bring that state of awareness into any point of your day, right? Even when you're just sitting in traffic or whatever it is, to just bring yourself back to that moment. So then when you get into the more stressful situations or the heightened situations, your body is now familiar with that state. And you can get to that point where instead of kind of going into reaction mode, you actually stop and you pause and then you respond, right? Because it's all about just getting ourselves to that moment of pause before we respond, where we're not just operating from our habitual programming. And that's so much of what the present moment is. And really for any changes we want to make in our life, for anything we desire, the place to start is right in the present moment, because that's where everything shifts.
Yeah. Well, Lauren, this has been so insightful and I think just very timely. You know, this is what we need, I think, right now in our world, is being present and learning things from nature and going outside and taking deep breaths. And so I appreciate all that you've shared today for everyone who's listening. If people are interested, Lauren, in finding you and finding more about Heartflow Kids and your cards, where can they go?
Absolutely. So the website is just www.heartflowkids.com. And we're also on Instagram at Heartflow Kids as well. And obviously, you know, we have the cards, but my passion is just sharing with everyone. So I'm always trying to put out, you know, free mindfulness practices and resources and all those types of things. So if you visit our website and join our email list or just follow us on Instagram, I promise you will get a lot of kind of just tips and practices, easy ones too. Like as a mom, I know it's got to be simple, it's got to be easy. And I also want it to be impactful. And so kind of pulling from my background in behavior change and all the research, I just try to bring it down to kind of the key points. So yeah, you can find us there. And then,
That's awesome. And let's end with a favorite outside memory of yours from childhood.
Okay. You know, it's so interesting that you were just talking about how we used to have the ability to be able to play outside when we were little. And that is the memory that kind of just popped up, is that we had woods behind our house. We just had maybe like an acre or two in our backyard. And my dad had cut, kind of these trails throughout it. And I just remember just, I don't know if I, was bored or whatever it was, but I would just head out in the woods and I would just sit there and walk around and play with sticks and go down by the stream. And we kind of had these little spots that we created. And I think that's where, honestly, at the time, it kind of occurred naturally to me. I was drawn to it. But that's really where I think the peace of nature was first embedded within me. And it's something that I lost, honestly, for a while, but I was able to kind of recently in the last, 5, 6, maybe 10 years, really kind of reawaken that. And that just memory of just the simplicity of childhood, of being outside, just sticks with me.
Isn't that interesting? It's like we end up going backwards to go forwards, right? I think we're all trying to kind of to get back to those moments where we just could be and have freedom and enjoy life and in the simple moments. So I love that. I mean, seriously, you talk about a favorite outside childhood memory of yours and you're like playing in the woods in the backyard with a stream, I mean, it's great. A couple trails. I mean, it's easy. This is easier, I think, than we think. So that's simple things.
Yes, that's what I always say. Life can be as simple as we let it to be. As we let it to be.
That's the truth. That's a great thing to end with. Lauren, I really appreciate your time. Heartflow Kids, people that are listening, make sure you check it out. And I look forward to, getting to know you more.
All right. Well, thank you, Jenny. I really appreciate the opportunity to be on and to virtually chat with everyone. And thank you so much for all of that you do as well with your platform and impacting so many families. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Lauren.